There comes a point in life where you stop chasing explanations and start recognizing patterns, and after 60, something strange starts to happen to people who've spent a lifetime surrounded by familiar faces, regular routines, and conversations that once felt so necessary. One by one, people begin to drift. Certain friends don't call as often. The invitations slow down. Some relationships start to feel heavy, draining, even empty. And while on the surface it may look like life just naturally shifting, deep down, if you're paying attention, you'll realize it's God pulling you away. Not to punish you, not to leave you alone, but to protect you. See, what most people won't tell you is that after 60, the stakes of your life change. The things that once seemed harmless, the gossip, the shallow company, the people who were more comfortable with the old, weaker version of you, start to become dangerous to your peace, your purpose, and your spirit. And because we get attached, because we've known them for years, because of nostalgia and memory, we rarely have the strength to walk away ourselves. So God, in His mercy, starts pulling you away. It won't always be loud. It won't always be dramatic. Sometimes people just fade. Conversations dry up. You find yourself no longer fitting in the spaces you used to crave. And it hurts because your heart remembers how it used to feel. But what you don't realize is that every time you stayed around energy that no longer matched your growth, a part of your spirit dimmed. Every time you lowered yourself to make others comfortable, you delayed what God was preparing for you in the quiet. So, as the years stack up, as wisdom deepens and time feels more precious than ever, God makes the decision for you. The people He removes aren't bad people. They're just no longer right for where He's taking you. And that's what so many people misunderstand about isolation after a certain age. They think it's punishment, that somehow they did something wrong, that they've been forgotten. But the truth is, it's protection. Protection from people who would unknowingly distract you from your final assignments. Protection from conversations that would keep you trapped in who you used to be. Protection from the exhausting effort of pretending to be interested in things your soul no longer cares about. God pulls you away because you've reached a place where peace matters more than noise, where solitude holds answers crowds never could. After 60, every minute becomes more valuable. You realize you don't have time for empty friendships that don't feed your spirit. You don't have the energy for conversations that leave you feeling unseen and unheard. The fake laughs, the surface compliments, the predictable small talk, they start to feel heavy. And it's not because you've become cold or bitter. It's because your soul is craving something deeper, something real, something eternal. And so, slowly, God begins to peel away the layers of your old life, not to harm you, not to humiliate you, but to set you free. Because here's the truth no one tells you. There are some conversations God can only have with you in solitude. There are instructions for this final, most impactful chapter of your life that He won't speak in a crowded room. He won't deliver them through people who are still attached to your past. They can only come in the stillness, in the space where your heart is quiet and your spirit is open. That's why some people have to go. That's why some rooms suddenly feel suffocating. That's why some friendships dissolve without a fight. Because what's ahead of you requires your full attention. And as painful as it feels in the moment, there's a strange peace that comes after. The kind of peace that isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet, solid, unshakable. The kind you feel when you wake up and realize you no longer need the approval of people who don't understand your path. The kind you find when you stop chasing validation from people who were never meant to validate you in the first place. The kind of peace that comes when you finally make peace with solitude. Because here's what happens when God pulls you away after 60. you start hearing yourself again. Not the version of you that had to shrink to fit old spaces, but the real you. The you who remembers the promises God whispered to you years ago. The you who no longer cares about trends, gossip, or empty flattery. The you who's ready to walk in peace, to move with grace, and to pour into the people and places that matter. You realize that some of the relationships you mourned were never built to last a lifetime. They were seasonal. They served a purpose. And when their time was up, God gently removed them so you wouldn't waste the precious years you have left holding on to people who didn't have the capacity to walk with you in this new season. It's a sacred kind of separation. And while the world may call it loneliness, heaven calls it preparation. Preparation for the wisdom you'll need. Preparation for the peace you're about to protect. Preparation for the legacy you're leaving behind. Because God knows after 60, you can't afford to be careless with your energy. Every conversation matters. Every room you enter either feeds you or drains you, and God will make sure you only sit at tables meant to nourish your soul. And so if you find yourself in this space where people are pulling away, where invitations stop coming, where the phone stays quiet, don't panic, don't chase, don't beg to be included. Understand that your spirit is being safeguarded, that your purpose is being protected, that your peace is being prioritized, because God sees what you can't. He knows the weight of what's coming next, and He refuses to let you carry it surrounded by people who aren't equipped to help you hold it. Trust the distance. Trust the solitude. Trust the quiet. Because it's not a punishment, it's a promise. What most people fail to realize is that as the years stretch past 60, your time, your wisdom, and your energy are no longer meant to be scattered carelessly in places where it's wasted, overlooked, or unappreciated. In your younger years, you spend so much of your life pouring yourself out for people who didn't value your presence, for conversations that led nowhere, and for relationships that drained more than they gave. And while you may have tolerated it back then, out of love, obligation, or sheer habit, something shifts after 60. God, in His infinite wisdom, begins to quietly reposition you, not to punish you, but to preserve the pieces of you that matter most. He knows that your remaining years carry a different weight. The wisdom you've gained, the lessons you've lived, the battles you've survived, those things weren't meant to be thrown into the same empty spaces you used to frequent. There comes a time when you have to stop casting your pearls before swine, when you have to stop offering the deepest parts of yourself to people who only show up when it's convenient, to those who treat your presence like an afterthought, or worse, a burden. And it's hard because you spent so long thinking you owed them access, maybe because of history, maybe because of shared memories, or maybe because you convinced yourself it was better to keep the peace than to protect your peace. But after 60, you start to feel it. The quiet irritation in conversations that once felt harmless. The ache in your spirit when you leave a room knowing you gave more of yourself than you should have. The unsettling awareness that you've outgrown people, but don't quite know how to detach. That's when God steps in, slowly, silently, and He begins to distance you, to pull you from circles you never would have left on your own. Because He understands that your wisdom is sacred now. It's not to be wasted in places that refuse to honor it. It's not to be spilled in conversations filled with small minds and smaller hearts. You have to realize that you are no longer called to be accessible to everyone. The older you get, the more critical it becomes to be intentional about where your time, your words, and your energy go. There are people who will drain you just to fill their own emptiness, who will cling to you not because they value you, but because they fear facing themselves. And while you may have once felt obligated to be their crutch, God is pulling you away because He knows that you can no longer afford to be what they lean on. Your strength is needed elsewhere. Your peace has to be preserved. Because here's the truth most people aren't willing to say out loud. Not everyone deserves access to you at this stage of your life. Not every conversation deserves your wisdom. Not every friendship deserves your effort. There are people who cannot grow with you. They were comfortable with the older version of you, the one who tolerated nonsense, who accepted less, who watered yourself down just to keep the peace. And when you begin to rise in awareness, when you start valuing your peace more than your popularity, those people will either quietly exit or cause enough friction that you'll be forced to. But this is not a loss. It's a divine subtraction. God removes people not to isolate you, but to elevate you, to redirect your time, your conversations, your emotional investments into places where they'll bear fruit. He knows the difference between people who genuinely value your wisdom and those who only call you when they need it. And while you may miss the familiar faces, what you're gaining in this new season is clarity about who's meant to walk with you and who's meant to be a memory. It's one of the hardest lessons of later life, learning that some people were seasonal, that no matter how much you invested, no matter how long the history, they weren't meant to walk into your final chapters. And it stings because you wanted them to be part of the story. You imagine growing old together, exchanging wisdom in your later years, sitting in silence because the friendship had grown so deep, words weren't always necessary. But then God shows you that their presence in your life had an expiration date. And when you ignore that, you risk your peace, your clarity, and your purpose. So when the calls stop, when the visits grow less frequent, when you realize you're the one who always reaches out, stop chasing, stop begging for old connections to stay alive when God is trying to birth new ones. The people who matter for this next season will find you. They'll be drawn to your spirit, your wisdom, and your authenticity without you having to compromise your peace or pretend you're still who you were. The truth is, after 60, you have too much at stake to keep entertaining what no longer serves you. Your peace is worth protecting. Your wisdom is too valuable to be wasted. And while it may feel lonely at times, you'll find that the conversations you do have, the relationships that do remain, will carry a richness you never experienced before, because you'll no longer be speaking to be heard, you'll be speaking to be understood. You'll no longer be giving just to give, you'll be pouring into people and places that pour back. It takes courage to let go of the familiar, to release people you once loved, to walk away from conversations that once defined you. But it's necessary, because this next chapter isn't about being everything to everyone. It's about being everything you were meant to be to the right people, the ones who honor your time, respect your wisdom, and meet you with the same depth you offer. So if God is pulling you away, let Him. If certain people no longer feel like home, accept it. If the energy in a room drains you instead of feeds you, leave it. Because every time you honor your peace, every time you choose yourself, you're positioning your soul for the deeper connections and conversations it was always meant to have. And there's a quiet, unshakable power in that. It's strange how life has a way of getting quieter as you get older. After 60, you'll notice that the people who once flooded your days with conversation, noise, and distractions start to drift away. The phone doesn't ring as often. The invitations stop arriving like they used to. You're no longer the center of the room or the person everybody needs something from. And at first, it feels like a loss. It feels like you've done something wrong, like you've failed in some unseen way. But what you'll come to understand, if you listen closely, is that this isn't life abandoning you. It's God making room for something greater. See, we live most of our lives surrounded by noise, the constant buzz of conversation, opinions, and expectations. We get caught in cycles of showing up for others, of fulfilling roles we were never meant to carry for so long, the friend who always listens, the relative who always sacrifices, the person who can be counted on to show up no matter how little they're appreciated. And in the middle of all that noise, in the middle of constantly adjusting yourself to meet everyone else's expectations, your spirit gets drowned out. The still, small voice inside you, the one that knows what you're truly called to do, the one that remembers the promises God whispered to you years ago, gets buried under the weight of everything you thought you had to be. That's why after 60, God begins to pull you away, because you spent a lifetime being everything to everyone. And now, in this later chapter, it's time to be fully yourself. But in order to hear who that is, you have to get quiet. The disconnection isn't a punishment, it's preparation. The loneliness isn't life forgetting you. It's God protecting you from noise that would drown out the instructions meant for your final, most meaningful chapter. There are some directions God will only give you in silence. Some revelations you won't receive in a crowded room, surrounded by people who only know the old you. Because the weight of what's coming next requires your full attention. And so, slowly, people start to fade. Conversations dry up. The people you once felt obligated to entertain no longer hold your interest. And it's uncomfortable because we're conditioned to find our worth in how many people surround us. But you begin to realize that most of what filled your days was the empty noise. Small talk, surface-level friendships, people attached to a version of you that you outgrew years ago but kept alive for their comfort. And when God begins to separate you from that, it can feel like loneliness. But really, it's clarity. It's space for you to finally hear what you've been too distracted to notice. You'll find that in this season, your conversations get deeper. You're no longer interested in gossip or shallow debates. You crave meaning. You want to speak about things that matter: faith, healing, legacy, peace. You want to be surrounded by people who see your soul, not just your history. And because not everyone is capable of meeting you there, the crowd thins. But what's left are the conversations that change you, the silences that heal you, and the wisdom that was waiting for you all along. And it's not just about people leaving, it's about you finally having the courage to release them, to stop forcing connections that no longer feel right, to stop being everything to people who wouldn't even notice if you stopped showing up. After 60, you realize how sacred your energy is, you realize how few good, quiet moments you have left, and you refuse to waste them in places that leave you emptier than you arrived. The thing is, most of us spend decades ignoring the call to solitude. We think being alone is something to be ashamed of, a sign of weakness or failure. But in truth, every major shift in a person's life is preceded by solitude. The moments of stillness where God strips away the unnecessary, silences the opinions, and makes room for what's real. That's where you find the clarity about what actually matters. That's where you begin to remember the things you promised yourself you'd do but put off for other people's comfort. That's where you rediscover who you were before the world convinced you to be anything else. And it won't always be easy. There will be days when the silence feels heavy, when you miss the noise, even though you know it drains you, when you mourn people who were never meant to stay simply because you love them. But those moments pass, and in their place comes a quiet peace, the kind of peace that doesn't need explanation, the kind of peace you feel when you stop chasing people and start chasing purpose, when you stop answering calls that leave you anxious and start embracing the quiet that leaves you whole. What most won't tell you is that in the quiet, you become dangerous. not in a destructive way, but in a powerful one, because once you hear your own soul again, once you reconnect with your own wisdom, no one can manipulate you. No one can distract you. No one can pull you into meaningless battles or petty drama. You start to see people for who they are, not who they pretend to be. And you choose peace over proximity. You choose solitude over shallow company. You choose growth over being understood by people unwilling to meet you where you are. That's why God pulls you away after 60, because what's ahead of you requires more than what you've given before. It requires a deeper level of wisdom, of clarity, of strength. And those things don't come in crowded rooms. They come in the quiet, in the long, still evenings where you sit with your thoughts and remember who you are, in the early mornings where you pray not for attention, but for alignment, in the moments when you realize that your peace is no longer negotiable. And the beautiful part is once you settle into that, the loneliness you feared turns into solitude you crave. The people you lost make room for the ones meant to find you. The conversations you thought you missed get replaced by ones that heal you. And you realize you were never really alone. You were being protected, positioned, prepared, because the final chapters of your life aren't meant to be lived for the approval of others. They're meant to be lived in alignment with the God who carried you through every chapter before this one. That's why the quiet is necessary, because some instructions are too sacred to be spoken over noise. What most people overlook is how age changes your vision, not the one in your eyes, but the one in your spirit. After 60, you begin to see life differently. The things you once chased lose their shine. The people you once prioritized start to fade into the background, and the moments you once took for granted become sacred. God has a way of pulling you away from people because in this stage of your life, your focus has to shift. The attachments that used to anchor you, the friendships that used to define you, and the voices that used to guide you, some of them can't come with you into the next chapter because they were only meant to shape a younger, less aware version of yourself. You see, when you're younger, you often surround yourself with people based on proximity, convenience, and history. They're the people you grew up with, worked with, or met through life's random moments. And for a long time, those connections feel natural because they reflect where you are in life. They match your mindset, your habits, your insecurities, and your distractions. But as you grow older, as wisdom sharpens your insight and life humbles your expectations, you begin to see that not every relationship is meant to last a lifetime. Some people were placed in your path for a season, for a lesson, or for a purpose that has long since expired. But it's hard to let go, isn't it? Because we attach meaning to time. We assume that the longer someone's been in our life, the more entitled they are to stay. We confuse longevity with loyalty. And so we hold on to connections that no longer nurture us, that no longer align with who we're becoming. And the weight of those outdated relationships quietly slows us down, keeps us tethered to old versions of ourselves, and blinds us to what God is trying to bring into our lives now. That's when God intervenes. He starts pulling you away, sometimes subtly, sometimes abruptly. The calls become less frequent, the conversations lose depth, the visits feel forced, and you find yourself drained in spaces that once energized you. At first you resist it, you blame yourself, you tell yourself you're changing, becoming distant or maybe even ungrateful. But what you fail to realize is that this is protection. It's divine editing. It's God pruning your life, cutting away the branches that no longer bear fruit so that what remains can grow stronger and more meaningful. And it's not personal, It's purposeful. The person you're becoming after 60 needs room to breathe, to reflect, and to heal. You can't step into the wisdom of your later years still carrying the emotional baggage of relationships that refuse to evolve. There comes a time when the nostalgia of history isn't enough to justify proximity. And in those moments, God pulls you away because He knows you'd never walk away on your own. He knows you'd hold on out of guilt, out of habit, or out of fear of loneliness. So, He does it for you. What's most beautiful about this process is that the space left behind isn't meant to remain empty. It makes room for new connections, for deeper conversations, for friendships rooted in wisdom rather than convenience. You find yourself drawn to people who match your current energy, who value silence as much as conversation, who prioritize peace over drama, who have no interest in surface-level exchanges. And though your circle may shrink, its depth expands. You move from quantity to quality, from noise to meaning, from obligation to authenticity. And in this sacred season, you start to see relationships differently. You realize that it's not about how long someone's known you, but about how well they know you now. It's not about shared memories from decades ago, but about shared values in this moment. The friends worth keeping are the ones who honor your growth, who see the wisdom in your solitude, who respect the boundaries you set without guilt or question. They are the people who check on your spirit, not just your schedule, who sit with you in silence, not because there's nothing to say, but because they understand that sometimes the presence itself speaks loudest. God pulling you away isn't a rejection, it's a redirection. It's His way of saying you've outgrown this. And though it stings, though it feels unfamiliar, you eventually realize it's necessary, because every season of life demands a different version of you. And the wisdom you carry now, the peace you're chasing, the clarity you've earned, those things can't coexist with the noise, drama, and shallow connections that once consumed your days. You'll come to appreciate the quiet moments, the solitude, the slowed pace, because it's in those spaces that you reconnect with yourself, with God, and with the few who truly matter. And the beauty of being 60 and beyond is that you no longer have to explain your distance, your silence, or your choices. You no longer feel obligated to entertain what drains you. You understand that protecting your peace is a form of self-respect, and you grant yourself the freedom to choose what deserves your energy. And when you do that, you'll notice something powerful. Your spirit lightens. Your days feel calmer. The conversations you do engage in leave you fuller, not emptier. You stop feeling the need to be everything to everyone and start focusing on being fully present with those who matter most. You stop chasing relationships out of fear of loneliness and start cherishing the beauty of selective, intentional connection. God knew what He was doing when He began to distance you from certain people. It wasn't to isolate you, but to elevate you, to prepare you for a chapter where your wisdom is valued, your peace is prioritized, and your presence is sacred. This isn't the ending of your story, it's the refining of it. And what's ahead requires a lighter heart, a clearer mind, and a circle that reflects the person you fought so hard to become. So don't mourn what you've lost, celebrate what you're making space for. The people who left made room for those who will understand you without explanation, respect your peace without resentment, and walk with you, not behind you. This is your time to live fully, quietly, and intentionally. And there's freedom in knowing you no longer owe access to everyone who once knew your name. What most people fail to understand is that after 60, God's separation from certain people in your life isn't about punishment. It's about preparation for your soul's final, most sacred assignments. See, by the time you reach this stage of life, you've seen enough, been through enough, and carried enough to know that not every hand you held was meant to travel the entire journey with you. Some people were only chapters, not your whole story. And when you refuse to let them go, you risk carrying dead weight into seasons designed for your peace, clarity, and legacy. God knows this better than anyone, which is why he starts to narrow your path. The conversations grow quieter. The rooms you once filled start to feel foreign. The people you once laughed with begin to seem like strangers. And though it stings at first, it's necessary, because in these later years, your assignment is no longer to be everything to everyone. It's not to carry the weight of unbalanced relationships or to pour yourself empty into cups that have no intention of pouring back. Your assignment is to step fully into the version of you that God intended before life's noise, trauma, and attachments distorted your reflection. And for that to happen, there must be separation, because clarity can't exist in crowded spaces. Purpose can't breathe in environments heavy with comparison, drama, and obligation. God needs to pull you away so he can show you what you couldn't see when you were too busy being available to people who only valued the parts of you that served them. He removes you so he can refine you, so he can remind you of promises whispered in your spirit years ago. Promises you buried beneath the expectations of others. The truth is, after 60, the battles you fight change. You no longer war for attention, status, or validation. Your fight is for peace, for wisdom, for moments of genuine stillness where you can hear God clearly without the noise of others' opinions clouding your judgment. And the older you get, the more you realize how rare those moments are when you allow too many people too close. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, your energy, or your spirit, especially when your soul is preparing for its final, most meaningful work. God pulls you away because proximity breeds complacency. When you remain in circles that no longer challenge you, that drain more than they fill, you begin to shrink to fit their expectations. You dull your light to avoid making others uncomfortable. You quiet your wisdom because they don't want to hear truth that forces them to confront their own stagnation. And God didn't bring you this far through storms, heartbreak, and victories for you to dim in rooms you've outgrown. This separation isn't about arrogance or superiority. It's about sacred protection. Because some people aren't meant to witness the fullness of your final chapters, not because they're evil, but because their presence would distract you, drain you, or attempt to keep you tethered to an old identity you fought too hard to evolve past. And what's ahead requires you to move unencumbered, with clarity, with peace, with the wisdom to recognize who's truly for you and who was only with you because of proximity, convenience, or history. And the difficult part of this is that some of those people might be family, old friends, people you've shared holidays and heartbreaks with, people whose absence you'll feel on lonely afternoons and quiet mornings. But you'll also realize that peace is worth that price, that your energy is too sacred, your days too limited to be spent in places where your soul feels restless. Because the older you get, the more you understand that not everyone matures. Some people grow old but never grow up. They remain stuck in cycles of pettiness, drama, and shallow thinking. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself shrinking to stay connected to people who aren't growing with you. That's why God intervenes. He severs ties you don't have the courage to cut. He closes doors you keep trying to reopen. He silences voices you continue to give too much authority in your life. And with every person who drifts away, you'll notice an unexpected gift, clarity. In their absence, you'll see yourself clearer. You'll remember dreams you abandoned. You'll hear God's voice more distinctly. You'll rediscover what peace feels like. And in time, you'll find yourself surrounded by a different kind of circle. Not large, not loud, but loyal, wise, and peaceful. People who value depth over drama, who care more about your soul than your status, who speak life into your purpose, not distractions into your days. It's in this sacred pruning that your final, most beautiful work takes shape. The wisdom you've gathered, the lessons you've learned, the peace you've fought for, they start to merge into something powerful. And you realize that the separation wasn't loss, it was alignment. A divine clearing of anything and anyone who couldn't travel with you into the space God reserved for your final, most meaningful assignments. Because God's plan for you in this season isn't about quantity, it's about quality of moments, conversations, friendships, and contributions to the world around you. He doesn't want you distracted by meaningless noise. He wants you anchored in what matters, fully aware of how precious your remaining years are, and willing to protect your peace, your purpose, and your presence with a fierceness that doesn't apologize. So when the phone stops ringing, when invitations no longer arrive, when certain faces disappear, don't mourn it, don't chase it, bless it and release it. Because what's leaving isn't rejection, it's preparation. God is making room for peace, for purpose, for wisdom, for everything your soul has longed for, but couldn't reach while it was too weighed down by people who were never meant to stay. The beautiful part is, once you settle into this new space, you'll realize you're not alone. You'll find kindred spirits who understand the beauty of quiet, the power of wisdom, and the sacredness of peace. And you'll look back at the separation not as a loss, but as one of the greatest blessings of your life.